This is the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast, session number 264. Kelley T. Woods goes online.
Welcome to the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast with Jason Linett, your professional resource for hypnosis training and outstanding business success. Here's your host, Jason Linett.
Okay, this is absolutely incredible. Hey, it's Jason Linett here, and I knew that as soon as I announced that during the whole virus pandemic, we were going to be coming out with 2 episodes a week of the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast, and I knew right away Kelley T. Woods was at the top of my list. Not just because she's a phenomenal author. If you don't yet have her books, buy them all. I endorse them. They're great. Not only the fact that she's a phenomenal hypnotist, but also the unique insight as to how she works with children and with teenagers remotely. And here's the thing that surprised me about this conversation that you're about to listen to. That yes, as she's a published author, that does give her a little bit of fame, where a little bit more referral may come in, a little bit more in terms of people finding her books, may track her down. But here's the reality. That's something that I had not yet thought of. A lot of the teenagers that I work with are athletes, are these high performance children, these teenagers that have so many things going on that scheduling is a nightmare. And if only there was some little technical solution that completely eradicated that issue. And my friends, the hypnosis online session through video conference is absolutely the solution here. And here's what's great about this. I'm 37 years old at the time of this recording, if I'm doing the math right. Yes, I am 37 years old. So it was when I was like 13 or 14 that my parents brought a computer into our home. When meanwhile, my children at the time of this recording, being 7 and 9 years old, grew up with it. So the barriers that a lot of us people have in terms of being adults may have about this platform of being online, kids today, they grew up with this stuff, so it's a little bit more receptive to them. That being said, you've got to listen to the nuance that Kelley involves about opening up the chat when you're on Zoom with a kid, and the ways that you can involve the whiteboard feature and get a creative process going. And everything you're about to listen to is something you could easily replicate once we're back in our offices, back working as we always had been before. So some amazing nuances here. And Kelley was incredibly generous. If you head over to the WorkSmartHypnosis.com website, and specifically the show notes page for this episode, which again is number 264, there are 2 resources that she's made available. We're going to put those up on the page. No opt-ins, just they're going to be up there for everybody to check out and really hop online, check out any of the resources she's got. I've learned a lot from her over the years and her outstanding books. And you're going to hear just a wealth of knowledge that I didn't talk so much during this one because I was taking some notes. There's some amazing insights in this episode. While you're there online too, of course, check out worksmarthypnosis.com/now online. No punctuation, no space in the middle, just bump those 2 words together, now online. And on that page is the first episode I put out in response to the coronavirus threat. But also on that page, there are step-by-step tutorials about how to do sessions online. There are some additional resources, such as some email templates. I'll be adding more online training events as they pop up to really use this as a moment of innovation, to use this as a moment to respond to the world, especially in a time, as Kelley highlights as well, when there's a definite need for the work of professional hypnosis. So check that out, worksmarthypnosis.com/now online, all one word, no punctuation. That's going to give you some additional resources. But again, check out the show notes for this episode to grab those amazingly beneficial and free resources that Kelley has generously made available. This is one you're going to want to listen to a couple of times. So with that, let's jump right in. Here we go. Session number 264, Kelley T. Woods goes online. So Kelley, welcome back to the program. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Jason. We need to keep meeting like this.
I know, right? Well, we're kind of changing up the model, coming out with 2 episodes a week, specifically highlighting those people who do a lot of client work online. And you were previously on the program twice, actually. You get to be in that select group of people who I put in the first 30 episodes before I figured out what the hell this thing was going to turn into. So you're welcome to go back and listen to episode 11. But really, go back to episode 174. We did it right on that one. And of course, we'll link to that in the show notes. For those that are new to you, can you give a bit of a brief introduction as to who you are and some of the work you do?
Sure. I have a private practice here in Washington State. I've been a hypnotist for about 18 years now, and I specialize in working with kids. So I'm really thrilled that you're having me on your show today, because this is an ideal time to be honing your skills online with working with kids and teens. And I'm going to be sharing some tips that'll make it easier for you so you can still have fun and be effective.
Love it. Love it. And that word fun is, I know, a big aspect of the work that you do. And having seen you, lecture on some of this work before in terms of working with kids, I'm really curious to hear how you modify it when now we're looking through the lens of a camera and watching the screen on the other side. So let's rewind the story back a bit. When is it that you first began to work with kids and teens in an online format?
Well, I'd say probably about the same time that I started working with adults. Kids present often with many of the same issues. And I realized early on that kids are already entrained to screens from a young age. And I think when I started having some kids who had some physical issues, in particular, there were some kids that have some chronic health problems, and they were really taxed and stressed going to nonstop clinical appointments with doctors or even mental health professionals. And so being able to be in their home environment and feel comfortable and safe was a great option.
Yeah. So were they local to you in Washington State, or were they then coming in internationally?
A lot of them were local. Some of my colleagues here in the Seattle area were referring them to me because, face it, a lot of hypnotists are still a little bit leery of working with young people. Mm-hmm. And that's, one of my causes is to help them open their practices to the young folk. And then, as I started to get a reputation and wrote a couple books on the topic, I started getting, from a broader expanse.
Right. Yeah. And I love that aspect of how, so you're right. So often, I'm even thinking to some of the, a lot of the athletes that I've worked with have been teenagers. And these are the ones that it's the biggest challenge to schedule with, because it's from this practice to that event. I had a high school baseball player that was playing on the high school team, but also then on what's considered, I think, what they call it, the field team, which was a little bit more, I hesitate to use the word professional, but just that game that on top of living an hour away and to open up this opportunity. And you're exactly right. They're more conditioned to working with a screen than most of the adults are out there.
They are. And so, you just mentioned that idea that it's more convenient for not just the kids, but for parents to be able to work in this way. But I think that currently, if we're looking at what's going on in our world right now, there are definitely some wonderful opportunities to be able to help this population. And whenever working with a kid, we're working in a systemic way, because we're effectively working with the entire family on some level. And this is a really important perspective to take. So even though we're having that one-on-one in an online session with a kid, we do need to consider, everyone else in that household, especially now in this time of, social distancing and even isolation.
Yeah. So let's kind of walk through that experience. That I'd imagine it's typically the parent who's reaching out to you first.
Yes, the parent's the one that are accessing our resources. And, there might be a plethora of different reasons why the parent is reaching out. Normally, I work a lot with teens who have anxiety, for example, online, or they might have sleep problems. For smaller children, it's often behavioral issues. It could be phobias, fears, nightmares, for example, food issues. And then again, we could have some, physical problems that they're having. There's a lot of digestive issues that kids are suffering from. We know the mind-body connection, especially, with stress levels. And so all of these things can now be heightened. And I think there's also an added element that's happening and will continue to happen by the time that your listeners are listening to this. It's certainly probably present. And that is boredom.
Yeah.
How do you keep kids engaged, especially if you're not normally a homeschooler or a stay-at-home parent? This can be really challenging for the whole family. And so there's this opportunity for us to be educating, to be leading kids in self-discovery or doing some emotional intelligence training through the fun interplay of hypnosis. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, which I love that approach of using this towards a time of innovation, a time towards actually improving. I mean, we're definitely going through that at home, as it's as of yesterday that the governor of Virginia canceled the rest of the academic school year. And then immediately at home, it became, okay, so here's our schedule at home. This way you don't have to keep asking, when are we going to do this? When are we going to do that? You can go look at the calendar and see exactly what time we're doing this. So outside of the situations that we're in right now, you've done that first interaction in some way with the parent. At what point in this conversation are you bringing the child into the dialogue?
Well, just backing up a little bit, I think it's important to prime the parents for online sessions and, really get clarity, number one, about whose problem it is, because it may really be sourced in the parent, and offering, those sessions to the parent is usually a good idea.
I'm laughing because it's 5 years ago that the parents were bringing their 14-year-old for issues with procrastination and not getting things done. They all showed up together 45 minutes late without the office forms completed. And I just cracked the joke. It was meant to be silly that, oh, okay, I guess maybe we should work with one of your parents first. And the mom goes, that's a good idea. How about I take today? I'm like, all right, come on back.
And if we have that perspective when we meet with the family and just have an eye out for that, I think it will happen often, and also in conjunction with sessions with their kids. It's great to get the whole family on board with hypnotic principles and language. So the other thing that's very important to do in that initial contact with the parent is to make sure that their child is on board with what you're going to do and is willing to engage. And that might be kind of difficult for a parent to judge and determine, but you can certainly offer a quick 10 or 15-minute online consult, which would also have the benefit of making sure that everyone gets a little bit of practice with Zoom or whatever platform they're using.
Yeah, so outside of the technology, which the great thing about Zoom, and here's what I tend to recommend, is that when you're sending over that link for the actual session, if you're creating an event custom for the actual session, which is my preference, that way there's no risk of overlap, you can click the button that allows you to then make it so someone can join the event before you show up, which the benefit of that becomes, I can tell them in advance, go ahead and click the link. It'll let you into the room. It's customized and encrypted just for you. But if you can log in advance, that makes it so when we connect, Friday at 10 a.m., it's done and taken care of. So outside of the technology, what are you doing to have that sort of attitude, that environment that everybody's on board?
Well, certainly, testing that out with the parent and helping them frame what you're going to do. And especially, with younger kids, I'm asking the parent to make sure that they know this is going to be, that the child knows that they're going to have fun. This is going to be something kind of different. Maybe they're going to be playing a game with me or learning something, and that I'm kind of a coach for their mind, because a lot of kids understand that coaching frame. Setting things up ahead of time is so important. We know that is true in hypnosis in general. But what I want to do is I want to utilize the parent too. And I might even ask them to agree to do anything during that session that I ask them to do. And this is wonderful. I've used it often where later on I'm going to be maybe demoing a convincer or even induction, or maybe an NLP technique with the parent. And this takes the spotlight off the child. And what teenager, for example, doesn't love seeing their parent go through something? This is, and we also know that there's such a thing as secondary hypnosis. Mm-hmm. And I've found that often parents want to linger in the room, not because they don't trust us with their child, but because they're kind of thinking this might be a 2-for-1. that they can get, that they're going to learn something, and they might even get to experience some hypnosis. So, you can usually suss that out pretty quickly when you're seeing, once you're online with them, and you can kind of see the parents might even be kind of hesitant to leave the room, even if their kid tells them to, because they're curious.
Well, I mean, just to get a little technical here for a moment, what is it that are you giving any specific instructions other than see that we can connect in terms of, I'd guess, like camera placement, in terms of where they would put their devices, so this way you can see child or even child and parent?
Yes, this is something that I usually, I might, prior to the session, just mention I want to make sure that distractions are removed. So if there are other siblings or, annoying pets, I think that, peaceful pets are welcome. We want to utilize those, but we know the difference, right? I did have a kid with his iguana, and that was awesome.
Nice.
I think we did some wonderful
Hang on, I'm checking to
metaphor.
see if I can buy iguanahypnosis.com. Never mind, we'll come back to that later.
Okay. I may already have that one. So, but yeah, having an angle where you can, get at least one parent and the child in there together, and that they're seated comfortably. I don't recommend that you have them laying down on a bed or putting them into any kind of place where they feel that they have to relax. Kids are usually pretty active, and if they're sitting up in a chair, they're going to be engaging more. And I really like the majority of the session to be interactive, because I'm empowering, I'm teaching skill sets to kids.
Yeah.
And, later on in the session, if I'm doing more formal work, if they're of an age that I can do that, they can certainly do that in a seated position. We know that kids are in trances all the time. So you kind of have to decide, and, each case, of course, just like with adults, they're individuals, and you're going to be calibrating the child's comfort level. I remember one young teen girl, she was probably about 12, and she appeared on the screen. Her mother was sitting next to her, and the kid had a hoodie on, and her whole face was covered by it. She was like a little mole inside of it. And she stayed in that little, protective garb for probably the first 20 minutes. And then it was only at the point where her mother stepped out of the room that she started to reveal herself.
Yeah.
So we have to let kids kind of evolve on their own that way too. Now, one thing that I found is really interesting is when parents go off camera, and they might even want to give you the impression that they've left the room, but they're still there. And you'll be able to know that they're there because the kids know that they're there. Well, it's like, okay, the elephant's right over there in the corner, and we all know it.
When you see the eyes kind of wandering to one specific area.
That's awesome. And so, with kids at about, anywhere from 8 to 10 and older, I always give them the option. Let me know when you're ready to have your parent leave the room, or your parent, if you're comfortable, you can have your parent stay too. A lot of teenagers will excuse the parent. And that's something that I say in that initial contact with the parent too. And they want to know, do you want me to stay there? Do you want me to leave? They want to get the best out of the session for their child. And I think that often they can be a reassuring factor, but they can also be a distraction and a limiting one. So you have to really be able to judge that kid. And even going by ages doesn't work, Jason, because I once had back-to-back in the same day, 2 12-year-olds that were so emotionally different and even physically different in their development that they could have been 10 years apart. So we have to really deal with the person in front of us and that individual.
Yeah.
And that means that we want to really get to know some details about this kid. And you can certainly do that in advance with your intake form. You can have them list their personal interests and hobbies and pets, things like that. But doing that in an interactive manner, I think is also important, and watching, how they're their nonverbals when they're talking about their pet, or they're sharing some of their interests. And that's going to give you the fodder that you need for creating any kind of change work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, just like in an in-person session, discovering what the child already knows about hypnosis and what they expect it to feel like and what they expect out of that experience. And of course, what they want to change, that's imperative that you're asking them that from the get-go. But, I think that we hypnotists tend to overcomplicate things, and we start to make assumptions, and we start to reassure even children that don't worry about losing control, or you won't get stuck. You won't get stuck in this state. Well, kids come with ideals about hypnosis that come from Scooby-Doo and Captain Underpants.
Yes.
And they might even be really impressed about the evil hypnotist. So we have to step into their frames.
I love that you just said that, because there's the example of, Captain Underpants, which is a very playful, very cartoonish way of doing it. But the bad guy, or the bad woman in Incredibles 2 is also a hypnotist. And I think it was you and I sitting next to each other when this came up, that the voice of that character in Incredibles 2 is the actress Catherine Keener, who's also the hypnotist mother in Get Out. That was very specific casting. But It's amazing that we as the adult, and especially as the adults in our industry, oh no, here's the Incredibles 2 with a negative slant on hypnosis. No, the kids saw that. They recognized it as a cartoon, and it's not either a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing. And it's like, well, today we're going to use that skill to help you to fill in the blank.
And it can even be a helpful thing, Jason, because really what we're doing is exciting the imagination.
Yeah.
And if they're fascinated by an evil hypnotist, their imagination is excited by that topic, and we can harness that and manipulate and maneuver it to a place where it's really going to be a helpful frame for them. So, there are so many ways to work with kids online. And one of the questions that a lot of people ask me is, well, what kinds of convincers or inductions are appropriate for kids? Well, many of the same ones that you would use with an adult will map across. Kids don't always want to close their eyes, especially younger kids. They might even be fearful of that, or I think even more importantly, they don't want to miss out on anything. That's why kids don't like to go to sleep at night.
Right.
They might miss out on something exciting, right? So I give them that choice if we get to that point where I would want to be, going inward and reducing outside distractions. I give them a choice, but I also let even older kids, teens know that all they have to do is look down if they really want to go inside. And this is an option that's great for anybody if they're in a public atmosphere and they don't want people to think that they're sleeping when they're doing a little bit of self-hypnosis. If they just look down at their feet or their lap, they can certainly accomplish that same filtering aspect.
That is great, especially, the simple conversational frame that, those moments where you're trying to find your words and you often look down to find them. We can use that same ability.
Perfect. I love the way that you just phrased that too. And, getting kids to talk is sometimes a challenge. They might be hesitant to share information, especially right off the bat. Here's a stranger and we're trying to get to know each other. And I think that a lot of kids might hold back on information because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And this is where patience is a virtue for us, allowing enough time, not only for a child to process an idea or a question, but when we give that pause, when we give that space, it lets them find the right frame for themselves to be able to explore. And this is really important. We don't have to be talking all the time. Give the kids some space there. One of the ways to do this is to pull in a medium of art or drawing, and Zoom has a whiteboard option.
Yep.
Which is fantastic. So you can bring that up and you can have the kid drawing something, or you can have old school drawing devices, I sometimes will just have parents have a tablet and some colored pens or crayons or whatever. And when the kids are occupied with this, and I might have them draw a picture of themselves as they want to be. I always want to start out with what they want, how they want to be, what their outcome is. And then we circle around the problem that way, because working in a solution-focused approach distinguishes us from anyone else that they might have used before, and also even from their own family members, because everybody has heard ad nauseum about their poor behavior or their inability to eat vegetables or whatever that the issue is. And so by just having them create an image of themselves as they want to be, this not only is occupying their conscious mind, it activates what's called floating attention. And we know that when the conscious mind is concentrating on something like this, the subconscious mind becomes available. This is true of any creative endeavor. And so at that point, we can use conversational hypnosis. We can, and if it is the whiteboard option, that's awesome, because you can see what the kid is drawing there, and then, or you can draw too. Sometimes I will do pictures. I might be drawing a dragon. I might be drawing, some anatomical drawing of their bladder and the mechanism that we're going to get to make a sentry so that they no longer wet the bed. So when we're engaged with this kind of a distraction, then it can also be inputting direct suggestions about the changes that they've told me that they want.
I want to highlight exactly what you just said there, because I think that's brilliant, that engaging the child in something creative is bringing the mind to the right place. And in that time, whether it's conversational hypnosis, whether it's simple direct suggestion, but simply by engaging them in a creative way, and now here comes the work, rather than, no, you have to lay in my chair with your eyes closed for this to work. That realizing just how flexible this work can really be.
It really is. And this is what we're talking about. We're talking about narrative therapy. And there are so many different ways to do it. And I really like using props like drawing or even some small toys or puppets, using them as an indirect way to distance the child from the struggle. Because all of a sudden, the squirrel puppet, most people know about Mr. Nutty, is the one who has the issue. And then I can engage the kid and have them actually be giving the treatment.
Yeah.
Which, as you can imagine, is very empowering. And I'll even say, wow, when they come up with some idea, I'll say, that is genius. Do you mind if I use that with this kid I'm working with tomorrow? And again, that raises their esteem, and it is cultivating their own problem-solving skills in a deep way. One of the other novel ways that I've used in an online session is to use the chat option. If a kid isn't very verbal, wow, that can unlock communication like nothing before. And I found that this works really well with kids who are on the autism spectrum. I've worked with a lot of kids who have Asperger's, and giving them that option if I find that they're really not expressing themselves freely with me, they jump into it. They absolutely love it. And, some time ago, Richard Nongard made a text hypnosis video. I think it's on his YouTube page. And so that kind of inspired me. Pretty soon I was working with that kid, and within minutes we had a really great trance going. And it was a trance that he was part of, right? So that's another idea for people who are delving into working online with kids.
Which I love, again, all the flexible nature of this. And especially I can think of a younger generation that it's a different mode of communication in texting and all the various apps that are out there, and to engage that and use that as the bridge into the process too. That's great.
Yeah. It reminds me also of one thing that you want to watch out for is that these kids aren't having other apps and devices running at the same time.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll try to sneak that in, but pretty soon you can pick up, that they're communicating on some other level with someone else, and of course maybe you could take advantage of that if you chose to, but
I think that's an issue.
Yeah,
that could be an issue, I think, at any age nowadays, because we're kind of used to, the use of multitasking, that it was kind of in the early days of like American Idol, the idea that now you were engaging with one screen while you were watching your television screen, and how for a while this didn't really take off, but the aspect of having something on your phone sync up with something on the television, where it used to be the DVD commentary, is now a thing that doesn't quite exist as much as it used to. I've found that, and this was something I was running into years ago, where I just found the phrasing, at least that works for me, is to say, because this is a change that you're clearly ready to make, the best advice I can say to you is to let this be an event. So to give it your full attention, turn off everything else. And even where for some issues that I see, they watch a video before we begin. And the same thing where now they're not in my space watching the video here. I'm sending to them by email. And just to simply say, I really encourage, let this be an event. Just like you bought a ticket to a show, and the moment you were there because you had waited for it, you're there, and that's got your whole undivided attention. I had someone yesterday that I had brought that up with, and he goes, oh, I love that. He had seen, who was it? Comedian Ali Wong, that a lot of comedians are now doing this, that when you show up to the event, they actually give you a zippered pouch that locks, and you can't use your phone during the show. It's not because they have this fear of it being bootlegged. It's them just saying, no, we got tired of looking at and seeing the screens. If you're here in the same room, watch the show already. Yeah. And that's a great attitude towards it. But I found just requesting, let it be an event.
I love that. And imagine using that to pre-frame something like using a metaphor of a spotlight for attention for a kid who has attention issues.
Yeah.
I have a process where I use that, where I have them mentally turn off all the other spotlights that have been paying attention to all the other things around them. And so we zone in on this one brilliant one. So that's a great metaphor right there that you could lead into. And there are so many different processes that work beautifully for kids. When we're talking about inductions, certainly we can use anything to do with eye fixation. I'll have a staring contest with kids. They always win. But there's something that happens when you just look at each other's eyes.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And sometimes I have been known to start a hypnotic patter in the middle of that. Another technique that I've used with kids is mirroring, having them mirror my gestures, even making faces with them. This is fun. This is, part of that play that they were promised that they would get to experience. Doing things like hand sticks, foot sticks, butt sticks in the chair. All of these are great and entertaining, and they give some of that hypnotic wow that a lot of kids are expecting in a hypnosis experience. You can, again, use some of those props. My Mr. Nutty Squirrel is very realistic. When I pull him out, kids think I have a real squirrel, especially through this format. It's, they're not quite there in person. They can't reach out and feel it. And so that can be a wonderful demo for a teenager to talk about suspending disbelief.
I don't think we talked Mr. Nutty the 2 times you were on before. Can you give a little bit more detail to that, please?
Mr. Nutty is my squirrel puppet who looks very real when I've got him in operation. And he's just one of the hypnotic props that I use to, distract that spotlight of attention off of the kid and come up with, them to be able to use their own problem-solving resources to build stories from. to be able to bond. Many kids will tell Mr. Nutty things that they wouldn't tell a human being.
Mm-hmm.
So there are lots of different applications. And whether I'm using a prop on my end or they have something, I encourage smaller children, especially, I tell their parents, have them have their favorite stuffed animal with them. I'm going to utilize them.
Nice.
Or if they have a cat or, a more relaxed dog, that's fine too. The iguana worked that time. That was great. I'm open to all that. So we can use props. I've used my pocket watch on a chain to hypnotize online. It's fabulous. And we know that that's really bilateral stimulation. So what a great technique to use to introduce that tool to a kid who has anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a video share of a hypnotic spiral. That's a really fun, amazing one. So, using any of these things, but when I use any of these kind of convincers or even inductions with kids, they're always instructional in some nature.
Yeah.
I want to be able for them to walk away having learned something about themselves, about their own mind, about the mind-body connection through that. And it's usually a goal during a session to teach them some form of self-hypnosis. And it needs to be done in a very simple and easy way, something that's brief, that takes, maybe 1 to 3 minutes. And then I will ask them once they've experienced it and they're showing that they can do it effectively, I'll ask them when they think they would use it.
Yeah. Example of that, you sent over some resources, which on the show notes of this page, we're going to make these available to everybody as well. Like you sent over the power word and the signal for kids. Could you chat a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this power word template is really helping a child find a resource state and anchoring it with a specific word. And through the process, you are just offering them a choice of words. And then they get to pick one, because a lot of kids are struggling with a lack of control in their life, especially now. I mean, so much of their life is limited, where they can go, who they can hang out with. Even, their foods are being chosen, their clothes are being chosen for them. And so giving them a sense of agency is often giving them a sense of control. So I offer lots of choices in my work with kids. And this power word process helps them choose a word that represents, that elicits a certain state within them. And so I've included that in the resources. It's pretty self-explanatory there. And, there are so many of these awesome processes that we can use with kids that we also do with our adult clients. But I think it's so important to be setting that up properly for them. We're not just going to have a kid sit in their chair on the other side of the screen and expect them to close their eyes and move into a receptive state. We need to be exciting their imagination. We need to be guiding them and making them feel safe doing so. Mm-hmm. And of course, making the case for them to do so. And for me, that the path to that is fun. We all learn better when there's a sense of play going on. And, one of the things that I use a lot in my work is laughter therapy. Mm-hmm. And Dave Berman and I wrote a book, Laughter for the Health of It. And we do address working with kids and families in there. And this is a way that you can have the whole family involved. You could have them at some point in your session, bring in the whole family and run them through a laughter exercise, which is not conditional on jokes or humor, by the way. It's simply using laughter yoga techniques to elicit the feel-good chemicals that laughter brings in. And for a family to incorporate that into their daily routine is marvelous. And, in times of stress or times of no stress, it's a helpful tool to give them.
What's great about this dialogue is that really getting into just how much flexibility, how many options are out there, and really everything we've talked about can easily be translated over to practically any age. And eventually, as we're all back in our offices and back in our spaces once again, that all of this easily translates over, that To look at as people are kind of stuck right now, I think, in the dialogue of, yeah, but I can't do this and I can't do that. This is one of those conversations of look at the abundance of opportunities. Look at the way that we can actually meet with people in a format that they're already in. I had only one session so far that was about to postpone or cancel, and it was a couple who was coming in from Delaware. And I'm in Virginia. That's about a 2-hour or so drive, if you're lucky, depending on traffic. And Delaware has a full stay-at-home order. Virginia doesn't yet. I'd imagine it's happening soon at the time of this recording. To which I'd said, it's like, you ever do a video conference? And they actually responded, oh, yeah, we've not met with our accountant in person in 3 years. Which I go, well, I can promise you, you're going to have more fun with me than you did with your accountant. Put the computer on a bar stool. The two of you sit on the sofa. We're going to do everything exactly the same. And the benefit is I'm not going to have to inoculate the stress of driving 4 hours round trip. And they went, fantastic. So looking at using this as an advantage, as you've clearly illustrated here, that's great. Do you want to give it an intro or a bit of an explanation for this Rainbow Gifts for Kids that we'll make available too?
Yeah, that's based originally on a script from Don Gibbons. He and I wrote a book, Virtual Reality Hypnosis Adventures in the Multiverse. And we discovered that we were independently using the same metaphor of taking people to alternate and parallel universes as an alternative to age regression.
Yeah.
And especially for children, I am very cautious in using age regression for kids who may not have the resources to deal with anything that their imagination comes up with. And so taking them to the multiverse can be very interesting, very exciting. And this particular process moves them through each band of the rainbow, giving them a resource state. And so it's fun, and it's also helpful to them. And I think it's something that they can utilize on their own. I've had young people, even teenagers, who have experienced it, say that they often just go and step into their rainbow when they're feeling stressed, and access some of that experience that they had.
Although looking at this over before we jumped on the recording, how so much of this could be used really, again, for anybody, especially even a client with some sort of creative slant to what they do.
Well, someone somewhere, I don't know who to credit it to, once said that the subconscious mind is much like a bright 8-year-old. And so we know that when we're working with adults, on some level, we're really working with a big kid, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Kelley, this has been phenomenal in terms of giving people some really specific strategies and ways to think above and beyond what perhaps seemed as a bit of a limitation early on in all of this, but now is opening up many more possibilities. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me on. And I just want to reiterate that if people want to draw this particular audience, I think currently a frame of having it be as a form of education is an excellent one, because parents are looking for those resources, but they're also looking for things that are going to engage their kids in a new way. And hypnosis certainly affords that.
Absolutely. And as a proud owner of all of your books and resources that are out there too, how can people best get in contact with you, and where can they go to track down more information?
Well, they can. My regular website is woodshypnosis.com, but I also have one specifically for any training materials and resources, which is Kelley, KELLEYT, woods.com. And I even have some free videos there of interviews that I have done, and it's all available.
Excellent. Well, wonderful having you on. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, I am seeing this period right now as a wonderful opportunity for transformation, personal and in a more global way. So I'm riding the wave, and I hope everyone else is too.
Jason Linett here once again, and as always, thank you so much for interacting with this program, for using it as a resource and recommending it to others. This is a good time to hop online, leave us a few reviews, helps us to reach an even bigger audience. Be sure you check out the show notes for this specific episode, number 264. Fun fact, the WorkSmartHypnosis.com website has a search function in the top left. So just go to that website, top left, type in 264, brings you directly to this episode. That's where you can get the resources from Kelley. While you're there too, add on the extension to be worksmarthypnosis.com/now online. All one word, no punctuation. On that page is the first coronavirus response podcast that I put out, plus a step-by-step tutorial in terms of how to set up your sessions online, some email marketing templates that are ready-made and yours for free to put into use, plus a listing of some recent online training events to use this as a time to continue to innovate and grow in the skills that you've got. And go buy all of Kelley's books. They're outstanding. I'm Jason Linett. Thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you once again live and in person very soon. And as we're saying this month, and really always, go wash your hands.
Thanks for listening to the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast at worksmarthypnosis.com.
Hey there, it's Jason, and I want you to be one of the first to find out as we upload amazing new content. So do this right now. Click the subscribe button right here on this video. That's going to link you to our YouTube channel here, and you will be the first to find out as new resources and downloads are made available. Do it now.